right, we're looking at Megan's image here. We can see that it was shot in manual, ISO 100, f8 at 1/60th of a second. So those settings are great. Keeping that ISO low at 100 is what we're looking for. Let's take a closer look here. We can see that you must have set up on a tripod because this is nice and sharp. And we have the candle pushed off to the side. And it's really just a candle and a windowsill. I guess we got a bit of a narrative that it's not quite night yet, that there's a house in the background, but pretty much we're just looking at the candle and the windowsill. So this is the formal or the form image, and this is your narrative image. And if we had just had the candles on the floor, I think that would not be a narrative at all. But actually having someone lighting one of the candles, like creating an atmosphere by lighting one of the candles, that starts to be more of a narrative. You're telling the story. And we're curious what's happening next. Are you like having a picnic on the ground? Are you, I don't know, there's something about like a ritual that comes across with this. So what's happening? Are you creating a romantic atmosphere? What are you creating here? Brings up a question for us, and that idea of a narrative starts to come out. Let's look at the settings here. You were at ISO 400, f4, and 1/250th of a second. So those all look good as well. Looking at your contact sheet, this almost works better as less of a narrative because a house is not in the background, or this just documenting the candle itself. But I think your idea of having the hand involved in these images works better. If we just saw this, I don't feel like that's having much of a narrative. All right, these next two images are by Antonio. We are looking at a storefront, just what someone's selling, what this business is selling. We have a little bit more of a narrative because they've decorated this in a cute way. It's not like it's just walking past like a bunch of shirts that are laid out. Like they've put some effort into this and made it appear very manicured. Also, there's a bit of a narrative as we're looking at the reflection in the window. I always find reflections to be so fascinating. So while this is more about what's being showcased there, we also have this idea of the trees and the building on the other side and the cars passing by. So it has a little bit of a narrative, but this is definitely more form than what we're seeing here is the narrative. And we can see the narrative of the fact that we're in this pandemic and having the mask sign. We see that we're in Beverly Hills. We see the very formal architecture down here. We have the artwork. We have more artwork over here. We have name brands in the background. So this is starting to tell more of a narrative. Including all the way to the tops of these buildings was really smart to give us a larger view of what we're looking at. Let's look at your settings on both of these. So here you are at ISO 200, f6.3 at 1/125th of a second, and just a little bit smaller of an aperture here. But those settings all look good. Oh, it looks like we have someone else's contact sheets. So here we go. This is a reason to name your contact sheet correctly now. It gets misplaced there. That's Nikea's contact sheet, which I didn't get a chance to look at. Okay, so make sure you name your contact sheet and make sure you make it large enough for me to be able to view it. This is really small at 600 by 700. So as I open that up, you can see I can't give you any feedback on what's going on here because it's just too small for me to look at. So make sure you make them larger for me so I can give you good feedback. All right, these next two images are by Brad. Here we're at ISO 640, f1.8 at 1/50th of a second. So those settings look good. Now this white balance, I thought for sure you would have been on a manual white balance, but this is an auto white balance, which creates much of a mood here, right? So you're photographing this music venue, let's say, or a venue of some sort, and you have all these seats available, but they're all empty. So if we saw people there, that would be more of a narrative, but here just looking at the shape of them, it becomes much more about like the lines and the shapes that are happening. Now there is a bit of a narrative given our time right now where we aren't having music, live music. We're not able to enjoy that. And these girls walking up the stairs show a little bit of a narrative as well. So to make this more formal, more formally based, and just about the shape, I would just come in a little bit tighter. In the same way that we saw Tiffany's image at the beginning, where it was all about the rocks here, and we couldn't see beyond that, this allows us to focus more on the shape and less on the narrative that starts happening there. All right, so that's your formal image, and this is your narrative image. You're at ISO 200, F, yeah, you were at 1.8, you changed that to 8, 1/10 of a second, so a longer exposure. And by having that longer exposure, we're able to get some good movement here with that car as it's coming in front of us. So now we're looking downtown, we're seeing the people, few people walking around downtown, we're seeing people moving through vehicles, and we're getting the downtown life. I think a little bit more of a narrative would be if we saw more people walking around, which maybe just isn't happening right now, or if there was an outdoor dining happening. Something like that might add more of a narrative, but here we're getting action happening, so we're feeling like we're in your downtown area during the evening commute, and that's kind of the feeling I get, is more of a commute feel and less of a downtown feel. If we look at your contact sheet, oh, it looks like you like cropped that much better than I did. I was just doing something quick, and this looks much better. This is all about shape and line, and this is all about form here. Or even this, if the girls aren't back there, is much more about form. This is about form. So I'd say any of these images are stronger than what you submitted for this assignment as far as looking at it just in regards to shape and form. And then the images for narrative, yeah, you probably picked the strongest of the narrative images. This is a really nice formal image as well, as is this. You have a lot of formal images here. So working on that storytelling will be your next step to improving your images. Looks like you've got a good handle on the formal side of things. All right, this image is by Kayla, and this is her formal image. We're just looking at the flowers. We're identifying the flowers. We're seeing the repetition of the shape. We're seeing the repetition of the color. We're seeing the lines that are happening. The shallow depth of field allows us just to focus on part of the flower and then see that repetition in the background. If we had all of this in focus, it would be, too much overlapping, and we wouldn't be able to pull out this one that you have here. So your depth of field was really smart here. You shot this at f5.6, 1/320th of a second, ISO 200. So by getting closer to your subject, as we've talked about, you're able to have a shallower depth of field with that f5.6. And then for your narrative image, we have the bee as it's pollinating. So it's not a narrative like we're putting together a story in our mind, but now something's interacting. Now we're seeing like the cycle of life happening. So this is much more focused on narrative. So this is a smart image. Nice and sharp, good exposure. f6.3 at 1/125th of a second. Yeah, so you were changing your shutter speed aperture. Those both look great. Good examples, really separating that narrative and informal images. Just looking ahead. Maybe I'll stop so this doesn't get too long and then do my last critique.